running?
Yep, we're on.
Okay, James chapter 5, if you would, James chapter 5. As I shared with you, I'd hoped to finish the book of James before I had to take my break here. I'm not going to be able to do that, but we will do something. If I had to find a place to stop in James before we get to the end, I don't think I could have come up with a better one than the one we have right here, because chapter 5 and verse 12 does not end the book, but it does end the main theme of the book of James. This is really the climax of the book. This is the last test of saving faith. And it is the most important test of saving faith. James is going to bring everything together here in this final thing. He's bringing it all together. I'll put this to you. Anybody remember when you were taught how to write an essay? Okay, what did you have to end your essay with? What was the final thing? The conclusion statement. You have the summation. You bring it all together and you show what all the things come together and give that sense of, here's what I've told you, now here's how it all slides together and works. And this is exactly what James is doing here in this last verse of the test of living faith. And look, just the one verse, let me read this for you. But above all, my brothers, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, that you may not fall under, and I don't know what your translation says, but there's judgment is one, condemnation. Anybody have a different word there than those two? Judgment, condemnation, okay.
Footnote that says hypocrisy.
What's that?
Mine has a footnote that says hypocrisy.
I do not even know why that footnote would be, because I'll tell you that, I don't think that Greek word has anything to do with hypocrisy. So strike through that note in your Bible and make another thing, because that one's not even close to what that word means, as we will find out when we get to the last part of this. But it is the last test and the most important test, and how can I say that with such conviction? That this is the last and most important test of saving faith. What tells you that?
He says above all.
Above all.
Above all.
There's the key element. Above all, in summation, above, the most important thing as we put it all together, above everything else I've said, here's the one that matters. Now, this should not be an unfamiliar section to you. Anybody never heard this one? Your yes be yes or your no be no?
Jesus.
Jesus said it. Where did he say it? Just give me a section. Sermon on the Mount. As I told you, we're dealing with this book. James very much is lifting directly out of the Sermon on the Mount. He's going back to the most familiar lesson that Jesus ever delivered, and he's using things from the Sermon on the Mount again and again to establish these tests for saving faith. And you should remember this much. The test for saving faith, none of them has anything to do necessarily with doctrine as the principal issue. And why is it that if he's going to test for saving faith, why doesn't James ever bring up a major doctrine and say, here's what you need to remember of the doctrine that's true about salvation? Why doesn't he bring that up in test of saving faith? This is the test. We're at the last test here. You guys, you knew the midterm was coming. You knew the midterm was coming. Okay. You should. What's that? Because the character's the issue. Remember, James is talking to a Jewish audience, what we're all Jews very familiar with. The Old Testament, they had done the law. They were steeped in it. These were Jews that were part of the very first church ever formed, which means their pastors happened to be the apostles. Many of these Jews probably heard Christ speak live. They probably were there when he did the Sermon on the Mount. These were people who had been steeped in the Old Testament, who are now been years perhaps under the teaching of the apostles, and they knew the truth. So why does he have to test this? Why is he testing them for living? If they're so knowledgeable, why do they need tests to see if they're saved?
Well, the Jews had made an art out of playing word games with promises, I guess you'd say.
The test of living faith come down because the Jews knew truth, but they didn't have a living and dynamic relationship with God, did they? They did play games. They learned how to deal with the written word, but they didn't understand a living relationship necessarily. And James's concern is, now that they've come into the church, they may have heard a new body of truth, but they're living by the same old standard. I'm just going to take this doctrine about Jesus, add it to my Old Testament doctrine, and live as I always have. And they miss the critical thing, because what is the reality? God has changed us by bringing us from death into life. He has made us new. Behold, how many things are new? All things are new. And those things include a character that should mark us. This is what James is trying to get across. That if God have you noticed there's a difference between dead and living things? Hard to pick up on, or have you noticed there's some difference between those two things? I've noticed. I think it's very markedly different. He's saying that there's a character now that should be real in the life of a believer. And we've gone through these aspects of character, and now he's going to say something here. Here's the summation as he comes to this last test. He's saying, if you have passed all these other tests, if these other aspects of character are in your life, now by perfection, no, but have they taken root? Is there a dynamic change in what you are that is visible? And as you take each of these tests, you see God at work changing what you are. These all culminate in a person that is marked by a very particular kind of character. And what kind of character? What's the test for here? Let's see if you can pick up on this. What is the test? What should mark a believer if they have the character of God more than anything else? Integrity. Truth. An honest person. We've asked you this before. More than anything else, what makes you trust a person?
They carry out what they say.
If they do what they say they're going to do. They keep their word. That really means something. Why does that mean something to us? You can trust them. And isn't it different than most people that you know? Isn't that a kind of a unique person? Someone who actually does what they say they're going to do consistently? That is a different kind of character. Yes?
It also shows that they value and respect you. And they're not gonna,
That aspect of honesty does say that. It says, I actually care about you and I'm going to be straight with you. I'm not going to lie to you. There's something about that actually matters, doesn't it? It changes things. What are you laughing about up here?
Grace always says, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna lie.
I won't lie. Not going to lie to you. So above all is this test of honesty. And he says here now, we're going to look at this. If all of these character issues we've dealt with are culminating in a person marked by integrity, marked by a sense of honesty, you are in a good place. But I want you to notice this verse also says, if you have not passed any of these tests, and if honesty does not mark you as a character trait, what's the next half of this verse? You fall under condemnation. This is the culmination of everything he's talked about here. Now I want to take this apart. We're going to spend a little time here dealing with this verse, but I want you to know it's kind of interesting. The first thing he says is, you need to be marked by honesty. Your yes should be yes, your no should be no. And the thing that makes me know that you're honest is that you never swear to me that you're telling me the truth. Isn't that an odd place to start? I'm going to believe you if you never swear to me you're telling the truth. Why would the first thing he says is, if you're an honest person, stop swearing to me as you're telling the truth? Why does he start there?
If you have to justify it, then you probably aren't.
yeah.
There's the thing. I want you to think, oaths are a big part of our culture. And they were a huge part of Jewish culture. They were very big on taking oaths, of making promises, of trying to prove that something was true. But I want you to think about oaths. Why do we demand that people take oaths? Because people lie. And they lie under oath. That's the issue that James is getting at here. We always put this thing, yes, is an oath designed to try to remind someone of the solemnity of the importance of what they're promising to do? Yes. But the reality is, an oath is overwhelmingly a way to look at and establish a way to go after someone if they do lie. You understand that? Why do we make oaths public? Witnesses. I want somebody, because later when I come back and I find out you lied when you take that oath, how do I prove it? I had witnesses who heard you say it, and we bring them to bear. Oaths are overwhelmingly in our culture because we are known for lying. We are known for not telling the truth. That is what marks us more than anything else. We hit those things. We know that. I had a fellow was telling me this down at work years ago. It was kind of funny. He was sitting at a bus stop, and he goes, I was just sitting there, and the bus pulled up. He goes, and swear to God, here's the next thing that happened. He says the car came whipping out of the parking lot and slammed right into the back of that bus. Now, he normally never said swear to God. Why did he suddenly feel the need to say swear to God in our conversation?
Because he exaggerates a lot.
He exaggerates all the time. We all knew that this guy told us something you could believe about 30-40% of it. And he knew we all know this about him. So this time, he had to say, and when I was sitting there, swear to God, this time, unlike all the other times that I told you stuff, this one's true. That's how he tried to differentiate it. And that's the nature of our culture. We know it. From the time we were children. See if you remember this old oath that the children had to take. They would tell something on the playground, and you go, I don't think I believe you. Cross your heart, cross my heart, hope to die. Stick it. Now, is that a dark oath for a child or what?
Yes.
I want you to believe me so bad, I hope I die if I'm lying, or you can stick a sharp object right in my eyeball. Which is a very close thing to me right now. But anyway. And here we know.
Wait, does that mean you lied?
Here we know the big thing is, in the midst of that oath, as a child on the playground, while they're crossing their heart with their right hand, what did you have to watch carefully on their left hand? If they had their fingers crossed, because somehow in our culture, you can swear to be telling the truth with an oath, and it doesn't count if your fingers are crossed. That's how ingrained lying is in us. That we have a whole system designed around trying to find a way around an oath. I'm going to swear to tell you the truth unless I can find a way to swear while lying at the same time. This is the integrity gap we have, and we've seen these. We're right after an election period. Did you watch the oath of office? The president is sworn in, oath of office. Did you notice who was present when he took that oath? Who did he take it in front of? A Supreme Court justice. Put his hand on the Bible and said, why did we have to have a Supreme Court justice and have this done in front of an entire nation while he took that oath? Because people lie. And you know why a Supreme Court justice is traditionally done there? It's a warning to the president that if you don't mean this, there can be repercussions. There can be impeachment. We can throw you out of office, and then we can prosecute you for a crime. While you're taking the oath, is the implicit understanding that, you know what? He could be lying to us. He could be lying right now.
You can just pardon yourself.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, you can pardon yourself while you're in office. Now we found that out, you can pardon whole families and everything. Just kind of throw the whole thing out there. But all of these, there are oaths for police officers coming into their new positions. There are oaths for all of the cabinet members they have. There's oaths for the Secret Service. There's a military oath. And all of these oaths are there expressly because we don't trust anybody. One of the strangest things I've been hearing in this new presidency is the number of people who are surprised by saying, you know what, he's actually trying to keep the things he said he would do during the election. Even his enemies are going, yeah, I'm not used to this. We are so sure that people aren't going to tell us the truth that it actually surprises us now when a public figure attempts to do what they said they're going to do. Oh, wow. Our understanding that people tend to lie is so ingrained that we have jokes about it. I'm sure you've heard those. It's applied to different people. But the first place I ever heard it was applied to a politician. It said, how do you know a politician's lying? Their lips are moving. There it is. You heard this one. There it is. Their lips are moving. That is our expectation. And you mentioned this lying under oath because we all have seen this in court. If you have not been in court, you've seen some show on it. How do you begin the person that comes up to give testimony? What's the oath? I swear to tell the truth, put your hand on the Bible, the whole truth and nothing but. You see how specific we have to get? I want the truth, and I prefer the whole truth, and I prefer no editing, let's do nothing but. the truth. And I've talked to lawyers, and they'll tell you this. They want that oath because here's the game that's played afterward. I swear you in. Here's you took the oath, but you hand the Bible, you sit down. Now you give a testimony against my client. My client over here is John. I hear the testimony. You're suing your father in court. Pretty dirty thing to do. But here we are.
Gotta get money somehow.
And we come back, and now I'm going to cross-examine you. And you know why I like the fact that I have an oath going for the cross-examination?
You can prove I lied.
If I can find a lie in any of your testimony, we throw out your whole testimony. In fact, I'm going to threaten you because you're going to say something, and I know you're lying when you say it. I know what the real story is. And I go, I need to remind you you're under oath. You do understand you're under oath, don't you, Kevin? You know what I'm saying? If we got you lying, I can charge you with perjury. And you are feeling the heat. And suddenly you go, no, now that I think about it, and your story may change. And again, even in our courtrooms, when we swear a person in, our expectation is they're going to lie to us. They are going to lie to us at some point, and I'm going to be able to catch them at it. Most oaths are about legal recourse, rather than the expectation that a person really will tell you the truth under oath. Why is lying such a part of that? Well, let's think about this. What was the first sin based on? A lie. What did Satan say? Did God really say that? Oh, you're not. He said you would surely die. You will surely not die. He lied. He was going after the arrogance and the pride of man to get him to sin, but it was based on a lie. In fact, Satan's major title is the father of lies. It's ingrained in our culture. It is part of the very being of what we are. And that's why he comes to this. He's saying this. If the character issues in your life have been changed by God, if truth has impacted you at the very core of your being, then truth will become the leading light of your character. When you look, then does that mean you're not going to make any mistakes? You're not going to say something you should? No. But he is saying that above all else, this will mark you. This is going to mark you. And I'll put this out to you. This is the third time that James has come to a test of what you say and how you say it as a test of living faith. It is the only issue in the book that is visited 3 different times. It has more information about this than anything else. And I'll put this out. You probably heard this. Actions speak louder than words. Right? That's true to a point. We tend to say, say whatever you want, but until I see what you do, I'm not going to believe it. But James is saying something to us here we need to remember. Words are action. Words are the most common action in your life. You will speak more often than you will do anything else in your waking hours. You will be defined more and understood more by what you say, how you say it, and if what you say is true than any other test of your character that is out there. This is the above all test about who you are. And so we come to this. And he comes up with this whole thing about words. And he begins with, do not swear. Do not swear. Now I'll put out to you that I think consistently with what James is saying, the Bible is very concerned with how we do speech as well. And most often when we say do not swear, what would be our first thought that the command is talking about? Yeah, foul language. That is not what's in view here, but does the Bible have a little bit to say about foul language?
Yes.
Ephesians 4:29, one of my personal favorites, and I love it. Let no impure speech come out of your mouth. Now, I love how that's worded. I love how that's worded because it says, don't let it come out of your mouth. Now, what does that immediately tell you is going on behind the mouth at the time? You've already come up with a zinger. You've thought it through. This is exactly what I want to say. This is the volume I want to add to it. This is how I want to turn. I want this to come out of my mouth. Boy, do I want this to come out of my mouth. And he's saying, I know what you're thinking. Don't let it out. Keep that inside. Keep from saying, because words impact people. Words actually make a change in what's going on. So let no impure speech come out of that. We're also hit with other speech commands. The Ten Commandments has one about speech. Remember that one? Don't take the Lord's name in vain. Now, what does that one mean?
Not use the name of the Lord as an
Flippantly.
Not responsive reference.
That was right. The Jews took this so seriously that they refused to even say the real name of God out loud. They came up with substitute words because they were so worried about using the Lord's name in a way that was inappropriate. Any of you grow up in a very strict family about that, where there's certain phrases you were never allowed to use? Darn, not to use the word darn, but what?
That's not.
I grew up in a Southern Baptist, and we were very particular about that. I got in trouble all the time. And in fact, there was a routine that sort of talked about that. Bill Cosby, I know he's fallen out of favor, but when I was a kid, I thought he was the funniest guys I've ever heard. Had some great routines. He said he was until the age 9, he thought his name was Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And that's because every time he was in trouble all the time, and whenever his father addressed him, you know the first thing he would say?
Yes.
Jesus Christ. And son, what do you think you're, and one day, when 9 years old, his son called him Bill, and he said, who are you talking to? My name is Jesus Christ, Dad. Don't you remember? And we had these things that were part of our thing. We were supposed to avoid. Don't use the Lord's name in vain. Don't be flippant with it. Don't put it in places it should not go. And so we came up with substitute words. Have you ever used the word geez? Geez, what was he thinking? There is no word in the English language for geez. You know what it's short for? Jesus Christ is what it's short for. That's what we came up with, substitute words, to try to get out of this and avoid those kinds of things. I remember being at a work day with that Southern Baptist pastor I grew up with, and this one guy was there with a rather colorful language. And the pastor finally said, you know, if you're going to lead us in prayer, I wish you'd get us all to kneel first. The guy goes, what are you talking? Because, well, you've been asking God to damn nearly everything here at one time or another. So if you're going to keep leading us in prayer, could we all get behind this thing? And the guy kind of colored red and didn't say much the rest of the day. But we have this sense that speech does matter. So let no impurity come out of your mouth. But our point here, remember, swearing in this case has nothing to do with improper words. And I understand why that's a concern. I don't know if you've noticed, but I don't think it's possible for them to make a TV show that does not have foul language now, or a movie. It seems completely impossible. You just kind of go, really? Does everybody have to talk like that? And it all seems to be in there. There used to be a sense of decorum. Years ago, the expectation was if you held a public office, there were certain words you did not say. And it was expected as a senator, as a sitting president, as a congressperson, you didn't say things. Have you listened to the congressional hearings of late? That's out the window. We no longer care about those kinds of things. It's crazy what we think we can say and how much we can put it out there. But in this case, he's much more concerned about an aspect of claiming to be the truth. This is swearing an oath. And as I said, an oath is part of our understanding from time immemorial. In fact, there's phrases in our language that tell us how common it was for us to tell oaths. And one was, I swear to God. You heard those in heaven's name? Kind of relates right to our past, swearing by heaven. In heaven's name, or for heaven's sake, and it was all part of swearing an oath. And oaths were a huge part of our culture for one basic reason, for generations, and most especially in the time of the Jews, and it was because of this. We didn't have a lot in the way of written contracts for a long time. Our oaths have now been transferred to paper. But you did oaths, you had to do that, and you had to give your word, and the only way you could trust you is to give an oath in front of witnesses. People had to hear you say it, and you had to hold that to, and you're trying to find people that were impartial, not your family members, not their family members, somebody else to hear the given oath. That was true all through Israel, was a people that had written word and so forth, but paper was massively expensive. And so you used it to record the word of God. You did so to do, royal decrees and different things. But I'm not going to use paper, spend money on paper, if you and I are going to do an exchange. I'm going to give you 3 ducks and a goat for a cow, whatever. We did this by an oath. We did this by an oath, and we added weird things. Remember one of the things in my people's background, in the Scotch-Irish thing? I don't know why somehow this made it more binding, but to be sure that you were gonna hold it, I would spit in my hand and you would spit in your hand, and then we'd shake hands. And somehow, that meant we really meant it. Now we're serious, man. We put spitting in the game there. Now it matters. But an oath contained basically three things. It made a claim to truth, it invoked the name of God as a witness, and it called upon God to bring punishment if you broke the oath. This was the understanding. And often it would they would end with this phrase, very commonly, may God strike me dead if I do not fulfill this. May God strike me dead. As Lord is my witness, may God strike me dead. You know, you had these whole things, and it was coming into that.
Be grateful that God is merciful.
And what is interesting here is if you go through the entire Old Testament, God actually commands the use of oaths to establish legally binding contracts. And yet here, and in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus and James are both saying, don't use an oath. Why has that changed? Why would God say in the Old Testament, this is a normal way to do it, and now in the New, he'd say, stop that? Yeah, John?
Perhaps because in the Old Testament, he was creating, in the law, he was creating a nation that needed laws in the first place, something that could be legally binding if you were going to transact, business or whatever it might be. In the New Testament, they're already living in a culture that has a government and laws and jurisdiction to oversee that. Plus, in addition to that, they've corrupted a lot of the oaths that were given in the Old Testament.
You're on to both of those, and we're going to get to that corrupting the oaths. But here's one of the things that has changed. In the Old Testament, the oaths were imposed because he assumed the people making the statements had no character. In the case of the church, we're imposing a standard upon a people who are supposed to have been given character. They are supposed to be the church. They're supposed to be God's people who have been given the indwelling Holy Spirit. They have been made into something new. And now we're trying to put a character into play that should already be there, not moderate an evil character that God has saved you from. You follow me on that thinking? Yeah, you're supposed to be different. You're not those people anymore. God has made you into something new, and it shouldn't require this. But it does go back to that other thing. Here's the other problem. This Jewish audience that James is talking to were masters at using oaths to lie. They had an entire system built around this, and here's where it came from. Jesus makes this comment in Matthew 5:33. Again, you have heard that the ancients were saying, you shall not make any false vows, but shall fulfill your vows to the Lord. Now that sounds good, doesn't it? But here's how they took that. First off, let me explain ancients. In ancients, they're not talking about the prophets and the Old Testament writers of the law. They're talking about rabbis. This is rabbinical tradition. Understand, the Jews had two areas of authority, Scripture and what old rabbis had said about Scripture.
Those are Catholics.
And the Catholics have the same kind of thing, church tradition and the Bible. And these two travel together. And so you had all this rabbinic teaching that said this is what God really meant by what he said there, which sometimes was right and sometimes wasn't. But here's what Jesus said. The ancients have been telling you for some time, you need to fulfill a vow you made before the Lord. Now, that sounds good, but here's how they took it. So what you're saying is, as long as I don't do that vow before the Lord, I don't have to keep it. You see, does the human mind surprise you at how devious it is?
It's not even long.
There you go. So here's what you did. I know that if I invoke God, I'm supposed to keep the vow. So what I need to do to convince you, Bill, I'm going to make a vow to you. I need to come up with ways to make you think I'm invoking God while I'm not really invoking God. So, I swear by the sanctuary of God, but not God, but the sanctuary in the temple, that I'm going to keep my word. And you go, well, he invoked God. Well, no, I didn't. I said the sanctuary. And all the witnesses, did I say I did it before God, or did I say I did it for the sanctuary? Well, now that we think about it, he said for the sanctuary. Well, in that case, I don't have to pay off.
I swear on a stack of Bibles.
You did on things. Growing up in the South, it was so, I swear by my mother's grave. I swear by, I'm not sure why that makes it more binding, but they did these things. In fact, Jesus addresses that, this whole idea of what was going on. Matthew 23:16 said, "Woe to you blind guides who say, whoever swears by the sanctuary, that is nothing. But whoever swears by the gold in the sanctuary is now bound." Exactly. So they even made up levels of how much we had to keep. So if I swear by God, I have to keep it, but there's various levels of how much I have to keep. So if I swear by the sanctuary, I don't. But the gold in the sanctuary, that's better, and now I have to keep some of what I said. And we had this whole system of how much of my word I had to keep.
It's still a lot.
It was, well, let's not cut down to basics. Let's marvel at the intricacy of my brilliance here of finding a way to lie. Let's not cut down to the issues that really matter. You're missing the point. And that's what they came through. What are you blind guides? And Jesus makes this comment. He says, "You fools and blind men, for which is more important, the gold in the sanctuary or the sanctuary that sanctified the gold?" I think you're not making connections here. And he goes on, he says, here's the other one. Some of you will swear by the altar, and you don't have to keep that, but if you swear by the offering on the altar, now it's more binding.
I swear by my prime ribs on the Lord.
There you go. If you swear by the Weber kettle, it's not binding. If you swear by the meat on the Weber kettle, somehow, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty serious.
Now we're getting serious, depending on how high quality the meat is, and then the level of it. Burgers are kind of basic, but if it's steaks, now it's serious. And we have this whole system of how do I get out of doing what I said I was going to do. So I want to lend credibility to my word, but at the same time finding a way not to keep it. Yeah, George.
Almost truth is false.
Not in their minds. Almost truth is almost truth.
Almost truth is false.
It's partially true.
They make great lawyers.
And so James comes back to this. Now I want you to remember, James, again, does a condensed version of this. Let's give you the full version. This is what Jesus said on the same issue, Matthew 5:34-37. "But I say to you, make no oath at all, either by heaven, that is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is the footstool of his feet, or by Jerusalem, for that is the city of the great king. Nor shall you make an oath by your head," because you can't make your hair white or black, "but let your statement be yes as yes, or no as no, and anything beyond that is of the evil one." Now, James only quotes it in the condensed version because he knew everybody was familiar with the full one, and so he just puts them in remembrance of what he's saying here. It says this is what you need to remember. You need to remember that Christ made it plain that you can't parse anything out by doing it that way. That is, you said, almost truth is still a lie. Swearing by one thing to say, I mean this much of the oath, but not that, you're parsing this out in a way that's not how God intends it to be. Now here's what it comes back to. This is Paul, Ephesians 2:10. "For you are God's workmanship, created into good works that God has prepared for you to do in advance." You know what he's saying here? You have been put out there as the representative of God's truth. This is your role in life. That is now your responsibility. God has raised you up. You are now the sanctuary of God. You are now the dwelling place of God. And any words you speak carry the weight of God's reputation. Do you understand that? Once you're identified as a Christian, once you've made that claim of identification, any word you speak carries his name attached to it. There is nothing you can say that is allowed to be of a lesser level. This idea of making a promise, he's saying, carries a much stronger standard than it used to. You don't have the option of finding ways to talk your way out of being held accountable for what you say. I'm going to put this verse. Anybody here have a verse that just impacted them more than anything else in their life? Some people talk their life verse. Does anybody have a verse that this one really always speaks to me? I come here again and again. A favorite verse that stands out? Yes.
Greater is he that is in you than the one that's in the world.
Oh, that's a great one. I got to. That's great. That is great. I love that.
No matter how.
Anybody? Yes.
Let not the sun set on your anger.
There you go. Monitoring anger. And if you've been in a household or a place where people that can really impact your life, that one's been a big one for me too. Yeah.
Whatever you do it from the heart, as something done for the Lord and not for people, knowing that you will receive the reward of an inheritance from the Lord.
These are great. These are great. I appreciate those. Those are impactful ones, and all of those are very special ones. I'll put something personal here. This has been my life verse more than anything else. And I'm not saying by any means that I have perfected the ability of being absolutely perfect to my word, but this has been very personal, and I'll put out for a reason. And I've shared before that my family was somewhat of a violent nature. They had problems, there were issues there and abuse and so forth. And people would think that really kind of marks you. But I'll tell you, more than the physical abuse, more than anything else, what troubled me as a child was the fact I could never trust what my parents said was true. My father most especially, the lack of integrity, that no matter what the promise was, I had no reason to believe it was true. That was disturbing to me. That hurt me more than anything else. I remember when he did the classic thing from the movies where he just in the dead of night took off with his secretary and left the state of California and went to a state where there's no extradition, where my mom could not get any kind of finances, and left behind the bills with his business and our home and just disappeared. And the thought that you could just walk away from your commitment disturbed me more than anything else. This was troubling to me. More than anything else, this I felt was the worst kind of character, most especially a man could have. That he could just not keep any of his promises, not any of his responsibilities, he just didn't care. To walk away from that was troubling to me. In fact, I will tell you this, that the reason it took me so long, it was very late in almost at the end of high school before I was even willing to accept Christ as Savior, despite growing up in the Southern Baptist tradition and a home that I heard the gospel all the time, was that I found that most Christian men I knew could not be trusted as men of their word. When I came to Christ, I looked at this verse, and I will tell you, I always have dreams of a kid. Well, what do you want to be? What do you grow up to be? And I told God, I don't care what you give me as a job. When life is done, I want to be remembered in just two ways: that my wife believed that I was a good man and a good husband, and I kept my word to her, and that my children believed I'd been a good man and a good husband, and I kept my word to them. More than anything else, that was what I wanted life to be marked by. And this has been the biggest verse in my life for that reason. It just codifies everything that God says that comes together in character. If you can believe a person says what they mean and will do what they say, that tells me more about a person's reality in Christ than anything else about them. And so I agree with James. I think this is the above all test. More than anything else, I think this is what it comes down to. My wife and I were joking about this the other night, all the movies that have come out about comic book heroes, Marvel, DC, Superman, Ant-Man, all of them are out there. And I was saying, you know what? I never cared for those as superheroes in my world. I said, I grew up, I tell you, I remember the Willie Nelson song that always hit me. All of my heroes were cowboys. And the song goes, all of my heroes are cowboys, and I guess that they still are today. And she said, that's kind of funny, because why? And I said, here's the silly one. You ever heard this in the old Westerns? I grew up, every other show was a Western growing up, every other movie. John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, Randolph Scott, all cowboys. Bonanza, Laramie, High Chaparral, every show, Maverick. But here's the thing of the cowboy. Remember this phrase, a man's got to do what a man's got to do, which is just a dorky phrase, except for one thing. What it means is, if I say I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. And the hero is always the guy that just put his life on the line to do it. Yeah, it was over the top, and the same music was in the background for nearly every show. It seemed like they had one soundtrack, and it was all done. But somehow or other, that appealed to me, the idea that what marked a man was that he kept his word. And I come back to this passage, and I say that I see this as the above all standard. That all of character has to come down to whether or not you can be trusted to say what is true. More than anything else, it should mark us. And then he comes down to this. As he said that, and he's warned us about this whole thing, he comes up and now says that you might not be condemned or judged. Now, this is an interesting one to me, because a lot of the commentators immediately wanted to change the word. They said, well, really, it should be not be chastised, because James is writing to the church, and the church is not going to be condemned. There's no judgment for the church. He chastises his own. He straightens this out. And so he couldn't be using that word. Well, I did a word study on paideia, which is the word here for judgment. James uses it back earlier when he says, there will be no mercy shown to those who have never shown mercy. Now, I don't know about you, but that one doesn't sound like chastising or to straighten your kids out. He says God's going to come down with judgment when there's no mercy if you're a person who can show no mercy. To me, that sounds like hellfire. Well, I also went through and I found out that every place that Paul uses the word, he uses it in reference to the threat of hell. As a matter of fact, this word is never in the New Testament attached to judgment that comes to Christians to chastise or straighten us out. It is always used to talk about absolute and final judgment. Now here's the question. Why would James use a word for hellfire when he's writing to the church? Because this whole book is test of
Because
saving
it's not
faith.
just one time, he's talking about a pattern.
He's
right?
talking about a pattern of living. And he's saying, if you've gone through all these tests and you cannot find anything that indicates the pattern of your life is trending in the direction of the things of God, if everything is still trending in the old direction before you claim salvation, then what is the James judgment on that? If you failed every test in this book, despite, yes, I know you claim to be a Christian, I know you're a member of the local church and that you're giving regularly and you work in Awana and you do, but if you failed all these tests, if your character does not show any sign of moving in the direction that God has indicated should mark a believer, what is James' assessment in this book? You're not a believer. You're not a believer, and judgment is hanging over your head. This is a very dangerous moment. What James is saying here is that come the great white throne judgment, there's going to be a lot of church members there. And that's not what should be happening. How can you spend your life in a church? How can you spend your life around Christian people claiming a title that is not yours? The reason James wrote this book is the fear that people can sit in a pew somewhere and think they're all right with God and be wrong. And now he's gone through these tests and says, above all, if you haven't picked up on anything else I've said, if you haven't understood anything I've come to yet, if you look at your life and you are not a person who is marked by truth, that when you say something, you mean it, we probably have a problem here. There is something missing in you that is intended to be part of what a Christian is by definition. And if it doesn't exist, you need to understand something. You are not on the right side of God, and that is not a good place to be. And you can't claim to be Baptist or Presbyterian or non-denominational or Assembly of God. You can't claim anything you want, but if the character is not there, salvation's not there, and God is not going to give you a pass based on being in a roll book in a church. It isn't going to happen. And so a very harsh thing comes up here when he says, you face damnation. And that's literally what this verse says. If you can't pass the test, this is where you stand. And you might want to reconsider. We can push the button one more time to turn it off. Questions or comments? I'll get you out of here somewhat early today. I only wanted to cover the one verse.